Okay, so hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Science of the Times. I'm Simon Khalid.
And I'm Tim Colson. And today it's a little bit different. We have a science correspondent from the BBC on, John Amos.
Well, hi guys. Although I should make one little correction now. I've just stepped back from the BBC, but I do have the tattoo in the sense that I worked for the corporation for 38 years,
Wow.
so which is quite a while.
Hope they gave you
So
a
it's in
carriage,
my DNA. It's in my
hope they gave
DNA.
you a carriage clock when you left for that length of service.
No, they don't do that anymore. They do, however, give you a little bit of money to go and buy. I got this letter from them when I told them I was leaving, and they said, so you can have a leaving present. It was something like £765 and 42p, something like that.
Quite
And
specific.
I had to spend the money on something, but it had to be done by a preferred supplier. In any large organization, this would normally mean furniture, or in the case of the BBC, it would mean cameras or microphones and stuff. So I eventually managed to get a camera. I could have had it engraved, but that would have had to have been within the sum itself as well.
So, Jonathan, can you, for our listeners and viewers, can you tell us what your your area of expertise were within the reporting that you did for the BBC?
Yeah, well, I started out as a general reporter back in '86. I did some freelancing coming out of journalism school, and then sort of got a short contract with the BBC in Cambridge. Stayed there for a number of years. Got put on staff. Moved to London, where I started to do some of the science reporting that I'd started in Cambridge. You can't avoid it, right? I mean, if you're in Oxford, Cambridge, you're in that golden triangle. You get a task thrust upon you as a cub reporter. Go and interview this person, and it
So
could
who
be
was the
anything,
first
right?
person? Who was the first person you interviewed then as about science? Can you remember?
About science, I don't know, but I don't know. I mean, I think you know this, Tim. I'd had one of these Road to Damascus events, which I should sort of put on the record here. So I came out of school with very little science education at all. Did no biology. Did a little bit of physics and chemistry, which I dropped early. I was more interested in playing sports, football, that kind of thing. But when I arrived in Cambridge, I discovered this whole new world that I just didn't know exist. And a key interview was, I think it was April '86 or '87, I can't remember. My producer said to me, "Go and interview Greg Winter." I didn't know who this guy was. I think he was deputy director of the Laboratory of Molecular Biology at that stage, and he had humanized monoclonal antibodies. This was a mystery, total mystery to me. And I
Many of our
spent.
listeners won't know what those are.
We should
Perhaps you
ask
could help
Simon
us out.
for the actual definition. But as I understood it back then, they were described to us back then as silver bullets. That was really how they were being advertised. George Collar, Cesar Milstein had managed to kind of engineer immune molecules to do specific tasks, and of course these were engineered using rodents in mice and rats. And the human immune system is pretty smart. It soon realizes, hang on a second, this molecule may well be a defensive molecule, but it's not ours, and therefore we're going to crack down on it. And what Winter did was to extend that research to kind of fool the human immune system to accept these molecules. And well, I mean, the world has been changed by them. I was just looking at the most valuable monoclonal antibody on the market today, which is a drug called Keytruda, which has annual sales of $25 billion.
Not bad, eh?
Extraordinary.
Not bad.
It's mad, isn't it? Right? Even my dog now, my dog has a monthly injection of a monoclonal antibody, which stops pain in her legs, in her arthritis that she has. So she bounces around thanks to this work.
So, John, you sort of, I guess it was quite a journey. You went from, okay, so you went from winter and the monoclonal antibodies to then sort of specializing in the polar regions and also sort of European space. Is that right?
Yeah, I had, because I was working in Cambridge, I was obviously starting to get very interested in all the science that I hadn't done. The Greg Winter episode was really a key moment, a milestone for me, because it convinced me that this might actually be an arena in which I wanted to specialize and do a lot of reporting on. And I just felt I needed that education that I missed. So I enrolled with the Open University, did 7 years with them, quite deliberately, sort of making an education that would allow me to do lots of different things. So, I did astronomy, I did particle physics, I got some biology, obviously geology, ocean sciences, atmospheric sciences. I quite deliberately went and picked very diverse sciences in order to do the reporting that I wanted to do. And, you kind of put your hand up in situations in a newsroom where somebody says, oh, we want to cover this story. It seems to be quite big. It's a science story. And then a lot of people in that room will sort of duck behind the chairs or the desks because they don't want to do it. And mine was the hand that always stuck up in the air, said, I'll go do that. I'll do it.
So why don't people want to do it? Is it because they think science is hard, or is it because they think scientists are incapable of explaining what they've done in an accessible fashion?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of, arts, humanities backgrounds in journalism. I think a lot of people go into journalism too, perhaps because they want to fight the good fight. So maybe they want to sort of do sort of political type reporting. I mean, I was kind of like that at the beginning. There was the BBC's political editor when I began reporting was a Northern Irish man called John Cole. I don't know if you remember him. He used to stand outside Downing Street waiting for Margaret Thatcher to come out in his big coat and his thick sort of Northern Irish accent. And I thought I might quite like to be him. And then I sat in a education subcommittee at Cambridgeshire County Council, and that completely dissuaded me from ever wanting to do politics journalism and to go and do something else. Because if you think particle physics is tough, you want to get into local government finance. That is just smoke and mirrors.
I think it's almost as probabilistic as the behavior of particles, probably.
Yeah.
Simon, I think.
No, I'm sort of just interested in sort of I think just the journey. I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, I mean, so there I was, sticking my hand up whenever an opportunity came up. When we started Radio 5 Live, which was this new talk station back in the early 90s, they were looking for people to do specialism. So again, I stuck my hand up, said, well, I'll do some science. I had a weekly slot in tandem with New Scientist magazine, which went out every Thursday morning. It was a 5-minute feature that I used to do based on something that was in New Scientist that week. They'd fax me one of the articles, and then I'd go out and interview people and make an audio version of that. And that went on for a couple of years. And then I moved fairly swiftly over to this new project, which was to set up BBC News Online. So what you know is...
Oh, wow, the website.
The website, right? So there was a small group of us that were sort of tasked with getting that together as a small newsroom. Obviously, we had to write code, the sort of HTML code, but that, we weren't sort of engineers, software engineers in that sense. We were the journalists that were writing the stories. And so that was just as a general editor. Again, if I saw something interesting in science, I'd go off and do it. But then in about 98, they said, right, we want to set up a special science section. And I took on that task, started the science section, the health section, and the technology sections, which you see on BBC News today. And,
so that's a hugely wide remit, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is the interesting thing about, do you have to be a scientist to be a science journalist? And of course, the thing is, it doesn't matter how deep your knowledge is. If you've got a PhD in the biomechanics of locust legs, that doesn't really help you do particle physics and the Higgs boson, right? It's more of an approach. It's a way of thinking. That's what's really important. Some of the best science journalists that I've come across in my career had no science background at all. You think of the recently departed Tim Radford, the Guardian, science editor of the Guardian. He was arts editor at one stage, and he was one of the best writers through my career. And he could get scientists to talk in a way, in a narrative that would engage the public, but also get the science right. Because you have to go to a certain depth, and then you have to come back because your audience is not there, right? They're not at that depth, so you can't sort of swim around there. You've got to come back to a level. Whilst not patronizing people, you've got to come back to a level which enables you to talk about these topics in a way that engages me. I mean, one of the things that really used to infuriate me about the media is, you turn on the Today program on BBC Radio 4 and you get these tough interviewers like John Humphreys. And, they'd take the Chancellor of the Exchequer to task about this and that. And then they'd have a scientist on. And they would go, ho, 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 well, I don't understand this. Well, yeah, whatever you say. Now, they would never say that to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but they advertised and celebrated their ignorance of science. And that really got my goat. It still gets my goat when I hear it.
Yeah, that still occurs, actually. But I think one of the, I wonder about this because often scientists are very precise in the language they use, and they want all of the caveats or they want the nuances to come across in a story that may only be a few hundred words, right? So it's impossible to do. Have you had kind of issues where you've been interviewing? I mean, did you ever send your copy back to the scientist you'd been interviewing to have a look at or to edit when you'd written it, or was that just too dangerous because they'd say,
yeah,
that 5,000 words?
That way madness lies, really. I mean,
You want to put the error bars on, right? Every sentence.
I mean, you get a sense for how certain people are and how they want things done or not done. If you have people that you know quite well, you have an understanding there. They know how you speak. I mean, it's a trust thing. Yeah. So I mean, and you can't get it completely wrong or really smash it with a sledgehammer to make it work for you, because that scientist will not come back and talk to you again. So there's a bit of a trade that goes on there in terms of, you've got to relax your language a bit. You've got to get rid of some of those caveats. And I'll meet you sort of halfway so that we can talk in a language that people understand. There are examples. I can't think of any off the top of my head now so I'll give you a classic example. All right. When we talk about all of the smashed up rock on the surface of the moon, the scientists talk about regolith. Okay. That is the correct term for that dust, those small fragments of rock. Science journalists talk about soil, right? It is not soil.
It's not soil, no.
But the public won't understand the word regolith. They've got no idea what that is. So we talk about lunar soil. That's what we do. So it's things like that. So we do develop a vocabulary that we think will work, and a lot of people, scientists, they kind of buy into it. If they're a planetary scientist, they'll go, yeah, it's not right, but okay, yeah. Know where you're going.
I think this is something we're learning, Simon, with the podcast, isn't it? Sometimes we'll be talking to scientists and they'll get into the real details of what they've done, and you understand why. And actually, we find it fascinating, so we have to sometimes pull back as well. But we should just go to our sponsors briefly. So if you're enjoying this, please subscribe, please like, please share, and tell your friends.
Hi, Tim. You're looking particularly snazzy today. What are you wearing?
I'm wearing a piece from a company called Grace and Garbo. And actually, you know a little bit more about them than I do, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right, I do. And
You're
as
the
you can
fashion
see-
queen. Yeah.
I'm also wearing a piece from Grace and Garbo. So this is a delightful knitwear outfit set up in Birmingham. What they do is they source knitwear, quality knitwear from all around the world. So it's vintage, one-off pieces, many of which they then hand embellish, like the one you're wearing today with its beautiful purple flowers. And so they're big on sustainability. Nothing goes to waste. Everything is sort of recycled and reused. And if you want to know more about them, then have a look at the link beneath this episode.
And thank you very much to them for supporting our podcast. I hope their sales soar.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Grayson Garbo.
Well, welcome back. So we're here today with John Amos, who's recently stepped down, just retired after 38 years at as a science correspondent from the BBC. And I think you wanted to ask some questions, Simon, about some of the stories. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. If that's okay, John.
Yeah.
I was particularly, as going through some of your reports, and particularly fascinated about the polar regions in general. And I just wondered if you could, I'll leave it to you. Tell us sort of what was your favorite story that broke about, the polar regions? Was it the penguins or the icebergs or?
Yeah, I mean, people who know me know that I have a really unhealthy obsession with icebergs, which is part of the technological shift that's taken place in the last 10 years or so. There's a lot of open source data now from satellites, which we can use in all sorts of fields. But particularly the last sort of 10, 15 years, I would say, the satellites in polar regions have really come of age. And we've made some quite extraordinary discoveries. I mean, I remember, being in Cambridge, obviously that's the base of the British Antarctic Survey. And, if you go back to the beginning of my career when I was talking to those people, we didn't have any real idea whether the Antarctic, for example, was gaining mass or losing mass. Now, today, we can put numbers on it. We can put, in the gigatons per year, we can put numbers on how much Antarctica is losing, where it's losing, where it's gaining mass through snowfall. And that is one of the great changes that we've had. And that's kind of fed into the environmentalism, the activism that's come alongside that. And obviously the development of computer models as well, being able to understand which are the regions of the Antarctic and the Arctic as well that are most vulnerable to future warming. So I don't know why, but I kind of just bumped into things polar, and once you start getting into it, it just becomes ever more fascinating. And the wildlife down there is extraordinary. The penguins. I love penguins. Everybody loves penguins. Everybody loves icebergs and penguins.
And did you get to go on location? Did you persuade the BBC to send you down to Antarctica to look at the penguins?
That's the funny thing, is that everybody assumes that I've been to the Antarctic, and I haven't. Furthest north I've been is probably Inverness or something like that, and the furthest south is South Africa. I've been to South Africa, so yeah. No, I haven't. I'd love to go. It would be truly amazing. Yeah.
Well, given you know so much about it now as well,
right. I mean, this is it. It would be fascinating to see it in person, to go to some of these regions. Some of these places are melting before our eyes virtually. You're seeing huge, great waterfalls coming off the edge of some of the ice shelves. Some of the ice shelves have, in the time that I've reporting, the Antarctic Peninsula, I don't know, he's probably lost 5 or 6 at least ice shelves have just gone. They've shattered and disappeared. So, yeah, this is a really dynamic moment in our polar regions, and people should be paying close attention because these are the parts of the world that are warming fastest.
And so how has the climate change story changed over your nearly 4 decades at the BBC?
So that's a really interesting question because, I can go back to articles that I wrote, let's say more than 25 years ago. Again, great uncertainty about what was happening. I, I get pestered. I get pestered about an article that I wrote in 2007, I think it was, where I was at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting. It's a big gathering of earth scientists every year. And there was some quite controversial research that was presented, very aggressive model that suggested that the Arctic, the sea ice, may be gone by 2013. Now, when they say gone, they mean less than 1 million square kilometers, because you're always going to, in the depths of winter, you're always going to have some ice, and even in summer. There's going to be places where the ice is thick, where it's attached to the coast, where it's not going to completely melt out. So, and this keeps getting thrown back in my face every year when the minimum number is published in September. It's always September, middle of September, that the Arctic gets to its summer minimum. If you read that article, I quote other people as well, other projections, but people aren't kind of interested in that. Slightly before that, I'd published an article where quite a prominent American scientist had suggested that the loss of Arctic sea ice had nothing to do with warming. It was all to do with winds and the change of wind patterns. And this was picked up in Congress, and you would find that sort of climate skeptic congressman would be quoting this article as proof that actually we didn't have anything to worry about. So on the one hand, I'm getting sort of bashed about for suggesting Arctic sea ice might go very quickly. And on the other hand, I'm getting bashed about the head because, I dared to suggest that the climate skeptics might have a point. You come forward 25, 30 years, of course, and a lot of these uncertainties now have been narrowed enormously. And we've got a very good idea of the way that Arctic sea ice is behaving, the way that it is spinning up as well. You can see that. You can see this layer of fresh water that sits on top of the Beaufort Sea. It's quite extraordinary, this bulge of fresh water that sits on top of the Beaufort Sea, because it's been spun up by the ice and the wind. And these are all characteristic of the changes that are taking place. The erosion that's taking place on some of the coastlines now because they're being hit by waves, the release of methane. All of these indicators are pointing in the same direction. Yes, there are uncertainties, but I think we've got a pretty good grasp, certainly compared to where I was 25, 30 years ago.
And do you feel the public is engaged more now? Are they more accepting of the climate change stories? Because
I mean, I don't know where. So there's an argument to be had about policy, right? So you can see what's happening. So how do you deal with it? And that's kind of where the arguments should always have been, right? Is what is our response? On the one hand, you have people like Bjorn Lomborg who say, well, yes, climate change is happening, but there are other, as equal important issues, maybe bigger issues that we should be spending our money on. And on the other side, you've got people going, no, climate change is the biggest threat we face. It is the big issue that is in our future, and we should be dealing with that. And so it's at some point, we should kind of move over just to that policy issue and talk about that. And you've seen with climate skeptics, you can always tell when an argument is moving away from people because they start to shift the goalposts. So they started out by saying there's no warming. There's always been climate change. It's been warmer and colder in the past. Well, it is, okay, so it is warming, but it's not warming that fast. Oh, look, there's been a pause in the warming over the last few years. Oh, no, it's going up again. Well, okay, there are other issues we should worry about. It's kind of, when those people kind of just start moving the goalposts, you think, okay, you've got a problem there. You've got a problem and you need to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, John, you also did quite a lot of reporting on space and particularly sort of European sort of
Yeah.
endeavors into space. Is there anything particular that sort of was a highlight for you in that area?
Well, one of the great things about the position I've had is to be in the room, right? There's nothing beats being in the room. I think of a few. One of the most remarkable spectacles I think I've seen in my career was just being with James Webb, the space telescope that took 20 years to build, 20 years to plan, cost $10 billion. I'd seen parts of it over the course of many years because it took so long to build. But to go to South America, to go to Kourou, the spaceport, the European spaceport, just as it's about to be put on top of its rocket and see it finished, that is really something. And to think it's out there now, 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth, looking back to, well, less than 300 million years after the Big Bang, that sort of idea that because of the finite speed of light, the deeper you look in space, the further back in time you're able to see. That's incredible. It really, really is. That kind of, it still blows my mind. I took somebody with me from the European Space Agency. I was making a documentary for Radio 4. They wouldn't allow us in the clean room proper for obvious reasons. We were in a viewing gallery. This is Mark McCaughrean, who's the science director at ESA. And so I wanted to get some idea before I recorded Mark coming in to see James Webb, because he hadn't seen, he'd been on an advisory committee for 23 years on this thing, but he'd never seen the finished telescope. And I said, stay there. I'm just going to get the lay of the land, as it were. Went in there and I thought, right, okay. Went out, switched on the microphone, and I said, come on, Mark, in we go to see James Webb. And he was in tears, actually, to see this thing.
I'm not surprised after having...
You go, the documentary still is still there on BBC Sounds, and it's about halfway through, and he really chokes up as he's looking at this thing. And to just wonder at what it's doing now. And I think one of the others that sticks out in my mind is 2015 was being in the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., when they announced the first detection of gravitational waves. So I mean, this is an Earth-based experiment. They're the most sensitive instruments that have ever been devised by men, women, to try and capture the very tiny distortions in the fabric of space-time that are created by gravitational waves. And they eventually get the machine up to the required sensitivity, switch it on, and even before it's properly settled down, bang, it detects a gravitational wave. And then they announce it in what was that? That was 2015, I think it was, February of 2015, around about that time. And we're all crammed into this tiny, tiny little room to hear this announcement. It still sends shivers down my... This is a 100-year quest, right? Mm-hmm. Einstein thought we'd never develop technology that was sensitive enough to pick up the prediction of his equations. And not only did we do it, but those gravitational waves very, very precisely matched his equations. It's just a beautiful thing, right? Utterly beautiful thing.
And did you get to a point when you'd sort of try and predict what stories might break the next year? And if so, what are the next big stories that might break, yes, or would like to see break, I guess?
Well, I'm one of the I guess the greatest story of our time would be to detect life beyond Earth, wouldn't it? That I think is the Holy Grail. Holy Grail. I think that is the thing. There's a piece of rock on Mars now that's sitting in a little titanium tube in the belly of the Perseverance rover, NASA's Perseverance rover, that was drilled from a rock that had these, they call them leopard spots, these little marks. What we know from the chemistry of that rock and the structures that we see, if you saw those on Earth, you think, oh, that's been mediated by bacteria, no question about it. So... can we get that rock back? Because at the moment, Mr. Trump has decided that he's not that keen on science, so he's going to cut the budget, or wants to cut the budget of NASA by a quarter. And the National Science Foundation by almost half. I mean, these are difficult times in the US at the moment, but getting that back is super, super important. I don't think James Webb is going to find that biosignature around some other planet, but maybe some of the telescopes to come after it will find a compelling biosignature. You know, so we'll see something in the atmosphere, or a combination. It's probably going to be a combination of chemistry in the atmosphere of another planet that says, well, you know, Occam's rays are the simplest explanation for that is its life. We're not there yet. But that is the great discovery, and you know, just as important, if they bring that rock back from Mars, and it doesn't have life, you know, that's almost that's even bigger, almost, right?
It's data.
It's you know, why isn't there life? Why wasn't there life? Why are we so special? That's these are magic questions. They really are. So we're going to push in those directions, I'm sure.
Simon, have you got I've got one more question, but we're running out of time. But one question some of our listeners are going to want is what advice, well, I guess there's two more questions. One, what advice would you give to a budding science journalist? Is it going to be go and study classics at university?
So I tell you what, I've poo-pooed a little bit the idea that you don't need a science background. You know, so why did I go and get one? Well, obviously, you know, I sort of fell in love with it and wanted to do it anyway, right? But having got that education, what it gave me was the ability to see connections, right? So you'll go into one field, you'll understand the scientific method, you'll understand why people work a particular way, you'll understand how science works, and that's true right across the board, right? So that is kind of helpful. But more fundamentally, is if you want to write, just write. You know, a lot of people in radio, which is where I began, you know, they pester the local radio station, the BBC local radio station. You know, and they might start out as a runner on the Saturday afternoon sports program, and then something happens, and you're the only person standing there, and they give you a recorder and they say, go and speak to the policeman where there's been this, you know, big pileup on the M11 or whatever it is. You know, very often it is about being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes you have to wait as well. I had to wait quite a while until I got my breaks. Don't be afraid to step back and go to the side if you think the path is more obvious. If that's the case, you know, there were times when I took a less well-paid job in order to move sideways, in order to move forward. Yeah, okay. But write more than anything else. Write, and you can self-publish now in a way that when I started you couldn't. Everybody can have a Substack if they want now. So it's possible, and then you can hone your skills. And then just make a nuisance of yourself. Make a nuisance of yourself.
Talking of writing, John, I was wondering, have you thought about writing a book? Is that something you might do next?
Well, I'm currently toying with the idea of a project at the moment. And I have an extremely short attention span. You know, for a while there, I was writing CFAX in my career, and that's 4 sentences, which it was an amazing discipline, right? I mean, CFAX was terribly constrained. Those that can still remember it, you know, you had a headline. The headline had to be between 31 and 33 characters. Okay, couldn't be 30, couldn't be 34. Had to be between 31 and 33 characters. Your story that appeared on the television screen had to be in 4 sentences. And they could be, let me see if I can remember this right. They could be any combination of 4 lines, 4 lines, 4 lines, and 3 lines, or 4 lines, 4 lines, 3 lines, and 2 lines. That's how restrictive it was. It taught you an amazing discipline, which was how to write concisely, because, you know, you couldn't use big words. You had to make things very straightforward. Because, you know, by the time somebody, I don't know if you remember CFAX, but it used to rotate, and if there were 15 pages, and you hadn't read to the bottom of the page that you wanted, you had to wait 14 pages until it came back, right?
I remember
You had to get it
watching
right.
test matches. I remember watching test match scores update CFAX in those old days. But okay, John, well, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting to you. I think we're coming to the end of our allocated sort of episode, really. It's been a fascination. I have to admit, actually, I don't think I've even told Tim this, but I think my preferred career probably would have been journalism.
When I was at school,
Never too late.
Yeah, I wanted to be a journalist as well, actually. That was what I wanted to be when I was at school.
And then we've ended up podcasters.
Yeah.
Eh?
But good luck
There you go.
good luck with your writing project if you go for it. And if you do, when your book comes out, we'd love to get you back on again.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it's great to speak to you both.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your
Thanks
time.
so much.
All the best. Take care.